The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter in soft golden streaks, highlighting the gentle chaos I had tried to control. Pancakes stacked unevenly on a blue ceramic plate, syrup pooling at the edges, and my daughter, Lila, humming to herself while attempting to spread butter across them, made the room feel alive. I smiled, tucking a loose strand of her curly brown hair behind her ear, trying to ignore the faint tension that had been building over the past week. The smell of brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of the lilies I had placed in a vase the night before. It was a small attempt at calm in a world that had recently felt anything but. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the mail, flipping through envelopes with meticulous care. Bills, bank statements, and a small, unopened gift from my neighbor sat in a neat pile. Normally, I could ignore the creeping anxiety, but today felt different. I had worked so hard to build a life where my family felt secure, saving every extra dollar, balancing the budget down to the last cent, ensuring Lila could have the childhood I remembered only in fragments from my own. And yet, as I held the latest bank statement, a familiar pang of unease settled in my chest. A recent withdrawal I hadn't authorized caught my eye. My hands, now clammy, hovered over the paper. The figure was significant, more than I usually allowed anyone access to, and I knew immediately who it had to be. My sister-in-law, Marin. "Mama, why is this syrup leaking?" Lila asked, tilting her head with furrowed brows, interrupting my spiral. Her innocence felt like a lifeline. I poured the syrup carefully over her pancakes, forcing a calm smile. "Just a little spill, sweetie. I'll fix it." I tried to focus on her laughter as she took the first bite, the sticky sweetness hitting her tongue, but my phone buzzed insistently on the counter. It was a message from Marin. "I just helped out with the bills. Don't overreact. You'll thank me later." I stared at the words, the warmth of the morning fading into a slow, creeping frost. She had done it again, decided without asking, assuming control over something that wasn't hers to manage. My stomach nodded. The syrup on Lila's pancakes blurred before my eyes, the cheerful hum of the kitchen turning almost sinister. I looked around the room, noticing the small details that usually grounded me, the chipped paint on the windowsill, the tiny crack in the kitchen tile, the framed photo of my parents smiling decades ago. Everything seemed to mock the fragile sense of security I had tried to build. Even the clock ticked louder than usual, each second echoing the tension in my chest. I poured another cup of coffee for myself, but it tasted bitter, like the anxiety that lingered in the air. Lila reached up and grabbed my hand, warm and trusting. "Everything okay, Mama?" Her eyes, wide and innocent, pierced through the panic threatening to overwhelm me. I knelt to her level, brushing crumbs off her cheek. "Yes, sweetie. Just a little problem with the mail, that's all." I meant it sort of. I didn't want to scare her, didn't want her to inherit this unease. But as I returned to the counter and glanced once more at the statement, the reality pressed down hard. Marin had overstepped. Again. And this time, I couldn't pretend it was a small thing. My mind raced through all the warnings, all the subtle manipulations I had brushed off, telling myself I was overreacting, that family was supposed to help each other. But the number on that statement, staring back at me like an accusation, told a different story. I glanced out the window at the empty driveway, wishing for someone to arrive, for a friendly face to reassure me that everything wasn't unraveling. But no one came. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, punctuated only by Lila's soft chewing. And in that quiet, I felt the first flicker of doubt. Hope, for once, wasn't enough to protect what was mine. The weight of it settled on my shoulders as I closed the bank statement and set it aside. The pancakes had cooled, the syrup had hardened, and the morning light now seemed harsher, exposing every corner of my vulnerability. I breathed in deeply, trying to steady myself, knowing that today would mark the beginning of something that couldn't be ignored. And in that fleeting moment, as Lila giggled at a syrupy mess on her fingers, I realized I had to act, before it was too late. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the living room where Lila was playing with her building blocks. I sat at the dining table, phone in hand, trying to steady my breathing. Another message had come from Marin. Don't make a big deal out of this. I'm just helping. You worry too much. I stared at the screen, disbelief curling into hurt. Help. This wasn't help, it was control. My hands clenched around the phone, knuckles white. I thought of all the times I had trusted her, lent her money, shared details about my finances. And every time, she had taken more than I had offered, framing it as concern or assistance. The doorbell rang, jolting me. I wiped my eyes quickly and opened it to find my neighbor, Greg, holding a small plate of homemade cookies. Hey, Cassidy, he said softly, his usual easy smile faltering when he noticed my tense posture. Thought you could use a little sugar. I forced a grateful smile. Thanks, Greg. You have perfect timing. He glanced at Lila, who waved shyly from behind my legs. Is everything okay? I hesitated, then shook my head slightly. It's just family stuff. I'm handling it. Greg nodded, but I caught the concern in his eyes. He had seen me navigate crises before, broken pipes, car troubles, work stress, but this was different. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a wrench or a call to HR. It was personal, invasive. As I set the cookies down, I remembered the envelope on the counter, the one I had ignored earlier. I tore it open, hoping maybe it was a mistake, something benign. But inside were statements showing unauthorized withdrawals totaling nearly $1,800. My heart sank, each figure more unbearable than the last. I looked over at Lila, sitting cross-legged on the floor, blocks scattered around her. Mama? She asked quietly, noticing my stiff posture. Her innocent eyes mirrored the confusion and sadness I felt. I forced a smile and knelt beside her, trying to absorb her warmth. Everything's fine, sweetie. Just some boring adult stuff. But inside, I felt a fracture forming, a slow crack that spread through the trust one had always placed in family. I typed a careful message to Marin. This isn't okay. You don't have the right to access my account. Almost immediately, her reply came, clipped and dismissive. You're overreacting. I just wanted to make sure bills were covered. Don't make a scene. Her words stung, each one a reminder of the manipulation I had ignored for too long. My chest tightened, and I realized just how little she valued my autonomy. I had always been polite, accommodating, the one who smoothed over family tensions, and now it felt like that very politeness had become my vulnerability. By the time evening rolled in, the apartment felt smaller, shadows stretching across walls that had once felt safe. Lila's laughter had quieted into soft humming as she stacked her last block, and I watched, unable to shake the gnawing worry that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I thought of all the dinners where I had smiled through Marin's subtle digs, the times she had offered help, only to take control, the nights I had stayed awake counting every cent. And yet, despite all this, she acted as though she was the victim if I questioned her motives. A soft knock on the door drew me out of my thoughts. It was Greg again, this time holding a half-melted candle he had tried to make into a gift. Thought you could use a little light, he said. I accepted it, nodding, the gesture a tiny balm against the sting of betrayal. The warm, faint smell of melted wax mixed with the aroma of the cookies, a small comfort in a room that had suddenly become tense and cold. As I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of Lila's small, questioning eyes. Why would Aunt Marin do that, Mama? I swallowed hard, forcing composure I didn't feel. Sometimes, people make mistakes. We can still love them, but we also have to be careful. Her little nod did nothing to soften the ache in my chest. That night, as I lay in bed with the weight of lost trust pressing down, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, control, and the slow erosion of my sense of security. The first clear fracture in my family's facade had opened, and nothing would ever be quite the same. I can still remember the first time Marin tried to take control. It was years ago, during the first holiday season after I moved into my little apartment with Lila. I had been excited, determined to make it special, baking cookies from scratch and hanging handmade ornaments across the tiny living room. Marin had shown up unannounced, smiling too widely, and offered to help with expenses. I, naive and trusting, handed her a check for a few $100s, thinking it was just family generosity. That was the pattern she had perfected over time. A small gesture of kindness, a soft-spoken suggestion, and suddenly, she held more control than I realized. She called it support, framing every intrusion as care. But the reality was far from that. Every month, there were subtle requests. Could I cover the electricity bill? Could I lend her gas money? Then the sums grew, little by little, until $1,800, my hard-earned savings, disappeared without consent, rationalized as helping the family. I thought back to Christmas a few years ago. Marin had insisted on paying for Lila's gifts, but she picked the most expensive items, the ones I hadn't budgeted for, claiming, "It's for her happiness, Cassidy. You worry too much." I had smiled and thanked her, telling myself I was lucky to have family so willing to give. But every package she picked up, every account she touched, left me feeling smaller, less in control of my own life. It wasn't only money. There was an emotional pattern, too. When I expressed concerns, she had a way of twisting them into guilt. "You're always so dramatic," she would say, or, "if you loved me, you wouldn't worry about this." I found myself questioning my instincts, wondering if I was overreacting. The more she manipulated, the more I hid my frustration, masking disappointment with laughter during family dinners, nodding through her thinly veiled critiques, and always reminding myself that she was family. Some incidents were almost comical in hindsight but stung in the moment. The time she borrowed my credit card to pay for her online shopping and then refused to tell me the total until the statement arrived. Or when she posted a photo on social media of a family outing I had painstakingly paid for, captioning it as if she had been the one to arrange and fund the trip. Each instance chipped away at the sense of fairness and trust one had once taken for granted. Even my own parents had been silent witnesses. They would nod politely, smile, and say nothing when Marin overstepped. I tried to remind myself it wasn't malicious, just overconfidence, carelessness, or family dynamics, but deep down I knew the pattern. Every time I tried to assert myself, it was framed as a breach of familial love. And so, I learned to hide, to give, and to swallow my frustration. Marin's manipulation extended beyond money. She subtly dictated interactions with others, giving advice I hadn't asked for and criticizing choices I had worked hard to make. She acted as though my apartment, my life, my child's well-being were extensions of her authority. Over time, I realized the danger. If I didn't set boundaries, she would continue eroding my autonomy, shaping my life according to her whims. I sat at the dining table one night, looking over old emails and texts from Marin, counting the dozens of helpful suggestions that had come with unspoken demands. Some messages were innocent-seeming, reminders to pay a bill, tips on budgeting. Others were bold in their entitlement, hinting that she expected access to accounts, funds, or control over decisions that were mine alone. Each one was a small betrayal, a thread in a web of manipulation that had been forming for years. The tipping point had come months ago, when she publicly bragged on social media about paying for everything so Cassidy could relax. I remember the shock, the anger, the sense of violation. My privacy, my effort, my hard work, reduced to a caption, a boast that painted her as the hero and me as passive and dependent. Friends commented, relatives liked it, and I felt simultaneously invisible and exposed. That post crystallized something I had been feeling for years. My trust had been weaponized, my kindness exploited. As I looked back over these incidents, a strange clarity emerged. This wasn't just bad luck or family quirks. It was a consistent pattern, a calculated undermining of my independence. And now, with the bank statement showing the latest overreach, the pattern was undeniable. Marin had learned exactly how far she could push me, and I had allowed it for too long. The lesson hit me hard. Manipulation is often invisible until it's almost too late. I had spent years accommodating, explaining, forgiving. But each concession had made it easier for her to cross boundaries. And now, staring at the figures on my statement, I realized that inaction was no longer an option. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal, and it demanded a response. It had been 3 days since I discovered the unauthorized withdrawals. I thought giving myself time to breathe would help, but each hour only sharpened the anger simmering beneath the surface. The morning was quiet, almost too quiet, with Lila at school and the apartment echoing with the hum of the refrigerator. I had just poured a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed insistently. The message was short, clinical almost. Check your account. I authorized a new transaction. You'll need to transfer funds immediately. My hands froze around the mug. The words blurred as my chest tightened. A rush of heat and cold collided in my veins. My fingers shook, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. That was it. Enough. This wasn't a simple overstep anymore. This was an outright demand, a violation of boundaries I had spent years trying to maintain. I stared at the message, rereading it again and again. $1,800 wasn't trivial. It represented security, careful planning, Lila's tuition fund, rent, groceries, every hard-earned dollar I had painstakingly saved. And now Marin, pretending concern, was trying to dictate what I did with it. I felt my phone vibrate again, this time a call from her. I ignored it. My fingers hovered over the keypad, hovering between rage and reason. I had tried reasoning before. I had tried politeness, subtle refusals, hiding frustration behind smiles. None of it worked. Her sense of entitlement only grew stronger with each concession. I sank into a chair, heart pounding, and closed my eyes. I could still hear her voice in my memory, soft and coaxing. You worry too much, Cassidy. I'm just helping. Helping. Always helping. Until the help became control, until my independence was eroded by years of unasked-for assistance. I thought of Lila, her little brown eyes bright with trust, of the future I had imagined for her, safe, secure, free from the entanglements of toxic family dynamics. And I realized, with a sudden sharp clarity, that I couldn't let this continue. Not for me. Not for her. The message repeated itself in my mind, each word like a spark striking flint. Transfer funds immediately. My hands unclenched, and for the first time in years, I felt a fierce, unyielding resolve. No, not this time. I would not let her dictate my life. I remembered the bank manager's advice from a few months back about setting limits, about the importance of account security. Now it felt like a lifeline. I grabbed my laptop, logging into the account and checking every recent transaction. There it was, the new request pending. My stomach twisted at the audacity, but I didn't panic. I took a deep breath and began setting the protections I had postponed for too long. Two-factor authentication, password changes, alerts for every transaction. Every click, every confirmation felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The adrenaline coursed through me, but this time it was tempered by clarity. I would no longer react out of fear or guilt. I would act deliberately, with purpose. This was my money, my home, my life. She had no right to it. By the time Lila came home from school, the threat had been neutralized. My hands were still trembling, but the fear had shifted to quiet satisfaction. I felt lighter, stronger, a spark of rebellion burning brightly. For the first time in years, I felt the scales tipping back in my favor. That evening, as Lila played in the corner, I allowed myself a small smile. The fight was just beginning, but I knew I had crossed an invisible line. No more excuses, no more silent suffering. The woman who had controlled, manipulated, and undermined me for years would not have this victory. And in the quiet of my living room, as the sun dipped low behind the blinds and the golden light touched the scattered toys on the floor, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Power. Power over my choices. Power over my life. Power to say no. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. The tension in my chest had shifted, replaced by determination. Lila sat at the breakfast table, swinging her legs, her cereal untouched. I poured her milk, letting the liquid settle into the bowl with deliberate care, my hands steady. Today was the day I would reclaim control. I started small, symbolic acts to mark the shift. First, I called the bank, my voice steady, even as my heart raced. "I'd like to place a freeze on my account," I told the manager, explaining the unauthorized access without revealing my full anger. The woman on the line was professional, efficient, and utterly reassuring. Each confirmation, the account locked, alerts enabled, Marin's access revoked, felt like a piece of invisible armor snapping into place around me. Next came the digital boundary. I changed every password, enabled notifications for every withdrawal, and even set a $1 transfer as a test. Every action was deliberate, almost ritualistic, each one a declaration that I would no longer be passive. It felt strange at first, almost indulgent, but with every confirmation screen, the adrenaline mixed with relief, and I realized that I hadn't felt this clear-headed in years. I glanced around the apartment. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes in a golden glow. The small space, once suffocating with tension, seemed to breathe with me. Even the walls, adorned with Lila's finger-painted masterpieces, felt alive, supportive, protective. I allowed myself a moment to appreciate it, the simple joy of being here, fully present, fully in control. Lila bounced in her chair, unaware of the storm that had passed. "Can I watch cartoons, Mama?" she asked, a bright smile lighting her face. "Yes, sweetie," I replied, reaching for her hand. The warmth of her fingers wrapped around mine, grounding me in the present. It was a small victory, but it mattered. My rebellion wasn't just about money. It was about creating a life where she could feel safe, where her trust wouldn't be exploited. That evening, I decided to mark the day with a quiet ritual of celebration. I cooked a simple dinner, spaghetti with garlic bread, and invited Lila to help stir the sauce. We laughed as the noodles slipped from the pot, twirling around her tiny fingers. It was ordinary, mundane, yet in its simplicity, it was radical. For the first time in months, I felt the freedom of choice, the power of saying no, the right to protect my world. The next act of rebellion was subtler, but just as meaningful. I drafted a letter to Marin, not angry, not pleading, just factual. "Your access to my accounts has been revoked. Further attempts to control my finances will not be tolerated. I expect respect for my boundaries." I didn't send it yet, just writing it was enough. The words felt like a declaration of independence, a statement that I existed on my own terms. By bedtime, the apartment felt lighter. Lila was asleep, her soft breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet. I sat at the edge of her bed, looking at her tiny, peaceful face, and felt a swell of pride. This rebellion, small as it might seem to the world, was monumental for us. It was the first step toward safety, toward reclaiming the life I had nearly let slip away. I lingered for a moment, thinking about the locks, the alerts, the passwords, the $1 test transfer, a series of deliberate, controlled choices. Each one was a brick in the wall I had built to protect us, a symbol of boundaries enforced, dignity reclaimed. And with each brick, I felt stronger, steadier, more capable. Finally, I allowed myself a deep, slow breath. The fear that had shadowed me for years was receding, replaced by clarity. I had drawn the line, and nothing could erase it. The rebellion wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, calculated, unshakable. And in that quiet, I found joy. As I turned off the lights and walked to the living room, I saw the soft glow of the street lamp through the blinds, illuminating the scattered toys and the small mess of our daily life. The chaos no longer felt threatening. It felt like ours, controlled and protected. I realized then, with a quiet thrill, that the first act of rebellion was always the hardest, but also the most liberating. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I slept knowing that my boundaries were no longer theoretical. They were real, enforced, unyielding. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory was mine. I had barely caught my breath when the chaos hit. The front door slammed open, echoing through the apartment like a gunshot. Marin stood there, face flushed, hands trembling, not with fear, but with outrage. "Cassidy, what did you do?" she yelled, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I stepped back, letting her storm in, but I didn't flinch. My heart raced, yes, but my mind was steady. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed the words I might need, the stance I would take. The locks were in place, alerts set, and every defensive measure I had implemented glowed like invisible armor around me. "You've frozen the account," she continued, voice rising. "I can't. This is ridiculous. I was just trying to help." I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Marin, you do not get to control my money. This is mine. Lila's. Our bills. Our life. Your access is over." Her face twisted, disbelief and fury battling for dominance. She threw herself against the kitchen counter, slamming her hands down so hard I flinched at the echo. "Am I not family? Don't you trust me? After everything I've done for you?" I held her gaze, calm, measured, unwavering. "Being family doesn't give you the right to manipulate, Marin. I trust you to respect boundaries. You've chosen not to." The shouting drew the attention of the neighbors. Lights flickered on across the street. I could hear murmurs through the thin walls of our building. Somewhere outside, someone muttered, "Is everything okay in there?" Marin's anger turned sharper, more desperate. She yanked her phone from her pocket, threatening to call the bank or anyone, to fix this. I didn't move, didn't respond with anger. I had learned that shouting only fuels her fire. Instead, I let her voice rise, her fury dissipating as I stood firm. Finally, the knock of authority arrived. Officer Jennings, a friendly presence from the local precinct who had once helped me with a minor parking dispute. He had come at the neighbor's call, concerned about the commotion. "Everything all right here?" he asked, calm, professional. Marin spun toward him, wild and frantic. "She's locking me out. She won't let me." "Ma'am," Officer Jennings said, looking at her with quiet firmness, "you don't have legal access to this account. Cassidy is within her rights. You need to leave." The words hit like a hammer. Marin's face fell, her fury deflating into stunned silence. She looked around, realizing that the drama she had counted on to intimidate me was unraveling in front of witnesses. Lila, who had been hiding behind the sofa, peeked out. Her little voice was small but clear. "Mama, are you okay?" I knelt in front of her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, baby. I'm fine. Mama's in control." Marin tried to argue again, but Officer Jennings politely but firmly escorted her to the door. As she was let out, she shouted one last thing over her shoulder, sharp and hurtful. "You'll regret this. Am I not important enough?" I closed the door behind her, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or guilt. I felt a deep, satisfying calm. The shouting, the threats, the attempted manipulation, it all stopped the moment I refused to engage, the moment I stood firm in my boundaries. I sank into the couch, exhaustion washing over me. Lila climbed onto my lap, wrapping her small arms around me. Her trust, unwavering and pure, felt like a shield. I realized that the moral victory wasn't about making Marin understand or forcing her compliance. It was about knowing my truth, asserting it, and protecting the ones I loved. The apartment, once heavy with tension, felt lighter now. The sunlight had shifted, streaking through the blinds with a soft warmth. The silence that followed the storm was comforting, filled not with fear, but with relief. I let myself breathe, each inhale reinforcing the sense of ownership over my life and my choices. For the first time, I understood the difference between confrontation and surrender. One demanded courage, composure, and moral clarity. The other, silence in the face of manipulation, had only prolonged suffering. Today, I had chosen the former. And as I held Lila close, feeling her small heartbeat against mine, I knew that nothing, no anger, no shouting, no manipulative attempt, could take this newfound power from me. I had won, quietly, firmly, and irrevocably. The day after Marin stormed out, the apartment felt unusually quiet, peaceful, almost surreal. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, staring at the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the blinds. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the familiar weight of worry pressing against my chest. The locks were secure, the alerts were active, and the control I had fought so hard to reclaim was finally mine. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Greg, holding a small basket filled with banana bread and a handwritten note. "Thought you might like a little pick-me-up," he said softly, his eyes kind and understanding. I smiled genuinely, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing.
Thank you, Greg.
"You have no idea how much this means." He shrugged modestly. "Sometimes neighbors just help each other. No strings attached." Inside the note, the words were simple but meaningful. "You're doing the right thing. Protect what's yours." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, it was validation, support, and kindness in its purest form. I realized then that true support doesn't demand repayment or control. It exists quietly, consistently, without judgment. The afternoon brought more small gestures of generosity. My coworker, Elena, dropped by with a gift card for groceries. The local librarian, Mrs. Whitman, left a note tucked inside Lila's library bag, praising her for reading 2 extra books that week and including a small bookmark as a reward. Even my neighbor, Mr. Thompson from down the hall, offered to help carry heavy bags when he noticed me struggling with Lila's backpack. Each act was a quiet reminder of the difference between obligation and generosity, between manipulation and care. I had spent years surrounded by people who blurred those lines, but now, clarity was blossoming. I was no longer alone in protecting my world. I took a moment to review my finances, something I had avoided for months out of fear and frustration. Each transaction, each number, was a testament to the careful planning I had done, the sacrifices I had made, and the independence I had earned. Seeing the surplus, knowing that I could cover Lila's school fees, our rent, and even save a little for emergencies, gave me a quiet thrill. It was tangible proof that I could thrive without surrendering control to someone else. Lila wandered into the kitchen, a small smile on her face. "Mamla, I think the apartment feels happier," she said innocently, her words landing like a soft blessing. I laughed softly, hugging her tight. "It does, sweetie. It really does." That evening, I reflected on the changes. The apartment felt bigger, lighter. The sunlight seemed to linger longer, catching on the polished counters and casting playful shadows on the floor. There was no tension in the air, no sense of someone watching or waiting for a misstep. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly safe. I also noticed a subtle shift in Lila. She carried herself with a newfound confidence, speaking her mind more clearly, laughing more freely. The sense of security we had fought for together was radiating from her as much as it was from me. It wasn't just about physical safety or financial control anymore. It was about emotional stability, about creating a life where trust wasn't weaponized and love wasn't conditional. I had built a small fortress of calm, supported not by fear, but by genuine care and healthy boundaries. As I closed my laptop after balancing the final accounts for the week, I felt a deep, satisfying peace settle over me. My rebellion, my careful boundary setting, had invited real support into our lives. It hadn't been loud or dramatic, but its impact was profound. I realized that protection and independence had a ripple effect. Those who truly cared for us could now step in, gently, without expectation. Looking around at the apartment, at Lila playing with her blocks, at the small gifts and notes from neighbors and friends, I finally understood. For the first time, we were surrounded not by obligation, manipulation, or control, but by genuine community. And in that quiet, sunlit kitchen, I allowed myself a slow, contented sigh. For once, the house felt bigger. The weeks that followed felt almost surreal. Each morning, I woke to a quiet apartment bathed in sunlight, Lila already up, humming a tune she had invented the night before. Breakfast became a ritual of calm. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit arranged just so. The small routines, once tedious under the shadow of stress, now felt grounding, a declaration of normalcy and control. I started keeping a journal again, noting bills paid, savings accumulated, and small victories like catching an error in utility statement or successfully resisting Marin's subtle attempts to contact me. Writing everything down helped me see the progress in black and white. I realized I hadn't just survived. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, a life that was wholly ours. Lila thrived in this new stability. At school, she became bolder, raising her hand without hesitation, participating in activities she had previously shied away from. I watched her confidence bloom, smiling to myself as she recounted her day over dinner, animated and proud. The joy radiated in her laughter, a sound that had been scarce during the months of tension and manipulation. I also began nurturing myself. Painting returned, my favorite acrylics and brushes scattered across a small easel in the living room. I spent hours blending colors, losing myself in the textures and swirls of imagination. It wasn't just a hobby, it was therapy, a way to reconnect with the parts of me that had been overshadowed by fear and obligation. Each stroke of color felt like a reclamation of my voice, my choices, my space. Even Marin attempted contact. A brief text arrived one afternoon. "Can we talk? I miss you and Lila." I read it carefully, then deleted it. There was no anger, no harsh words, just a quiet, firm decision. I didn't know her engagement. Boundaries had been drawn, and I wasn't stepping back. The act of ignoring the plea was liberating, proof that I could choose peace over chaos. Meanwhile, new, positive connections entered our lives naturally. I met Rachel, a coworker who shared not just professional advice, but a genuine sense of camaraderie. Lila made a new friend at school, someone kind and playful, expanding the circle of safety and joy around us. Life began to feel fuller, richer, less precarious. One Saturday, I decided to make a symbolic renewal of our home. Fresh paint went up on the walls, soft cream, warm and inviting, and I planted flowers in the small balcony garden Lila loved. Watching the green shoots sway in the wind, I felt a tangible representation of our growth and resilience. I took a photo of Lila holding the watering can, her smile wide, carefree, framed by the new blossoms. It was a picture of freedom, a testament to the life we had fought to reclaim. By evening, as I prepared a simple dinner, the apartment hummed with quiet joy. There was laughter, conversation, and a gentle sense of accomplishment. Lila danced around the kitchen, her shadow flickering against the freshly painted walls. I paused, taking in the scene, the serenity, the freedom, the life rebuilt. In those small, deliberate moments, I realized the transformation wasn't just external. It had settled into our bones, a quiet strength that would withstand future storms. Rebuilding wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about creating a foundation so solid that past manipulations couldn't shake us. As I tucked Lila into bed that night, brushing a curl from her forehead, I whispered, "We're safe now, sweetie. This is our life, and it's ours to protect." She smiled in sleep, her trust absolute, and I felt a deep, steady joy settle into my chest. For the first time in years, I understood that independence was not just about finances or control, it was about peace, confidence, and the freedom to choose our path. And as I turned off the lights, the apartment glowing softly with the warmth of home, I knew that we had truly begun anew. Months had passed since Marin's last attempt to control us, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and resilient. The apartment was filled with light, laughter, and the small chaos of a life fully lived. Lila had grown taller, more confident, her laughter echoing freely as she built towers of blocks in the living room. I watched her from the kitchen, sipping coffee, feeling a quiet gratitude I hadn't known I could feel so deeply. It was Lila's birthday. I had planned a small celebration, just the two of us and a few close friends who had become our chosen family. Balloons floated against the walls, their pastel colors catching the sunlight, and the scent of vanilla cupcakes filled the air. Everything was simple, intentional, joyous. Nothing felt forced, nothing felt overshadowed by tension. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find neighbors bringing small gifts, a homemade card from Greg, a potted plant from Mrs. Whitman, a book from Elena. Each gesture was a reminder of the difference between obligation and genuine care. We laughed, exchanged hugs, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for our happiness or justify our choices. A text from Marin appeared on my phone. I opened it reluctantly. Happy birthday, Lila. I hope she's well. I smiled faintly and deleted it without a reply. There was no anger, no hesitation, just recognition that boundaries were permanent and peace was non-negotiable. Lila blew out the candles, her cheeks rosy, eyes shining, and I clapped along with our friends. The sound of genuine joy filled the room, warm and unrestrained. I realized how much we had healed, not just financially or physically, but emotionally. The life we had fought to protect had grown richer, fuller, stronger. Later, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I found a quiet moment to myself. I opened my journal and wrote, summarizing the journey, the manipulations, the betrayals, the reclamation of control. I wrote about Lila's resilience, the support of friends and neighbors, the quiet victories that had rebuilt our home and our hearts. Every word felt like a testament to survival and empowerment. For the first time, I could reflect without anger or fear. I saw clearly the lesson I had earned the hard way. Family isn't defined by blood alone, and love does not justify control. Boundaries are not walls to isolate, but shields to protect, and enforcing them allows life to flourish. I glanced around at the apartment, the soft glow of the lamps highlighting the small decorations, the birthday cards, the flowers in bloom. This space, once heavy with tension, now radiated warmth, freedom, and joy. Lila's laughter drifted from the living room, mingling with the hum of the city outside, a perfect symphony of peace. As I closed my journal and tucked it on the shelf, I felt a profound sense of closure. The past no longer controlled our present. Every act of rebellion, every boundary set, had led us here, a home full of light, love, and autonomy. I knelt by Lila's bed, brushing a curl from her forehead, and whispered, "This is our life now. Safe, happy, and ours to protect." She smiled in her sleep, serene and secure. I stepped back, turning off the light. Standing in the quiet, warm glow of our apartment, I took a deep breath. Life had been tested, manipulated, and challenged, but we had endured. We had rebuilt. And finally, I could say, without hesitation, with the calm and certainty that only comes from true survival, home.